December in Willow Creek was a tapestry of crisp air and twinkling lights, a perfect facade of peace. But for one woman, Elara Vance, the season was just a countdown to war. She wasn't just in Willow Creek, she owned it, or at least her family did. Yet, here she was, living in a modest rental house on the edge of the sprawling estate her grandfather had built, watching the neighbor who had stolen not just her peace, but a tangible piece of her identity. This man, Arthur Hemlock, was the architect of her quiet humiliation. The reason she was living under a false name, Ellie, teaching basic coding at a community college when she should have been running Vance Global Holdings. Arthur, a man whose ambition had long outweighed his competence, had been her grandfather's protégé, and ultimately, his betrayer. He had systematically dismantled Elara's reputation within the company after her grandfather's sudden passing, convincing the board that she, the only rightful heir, was emotionally unstable and professionally inept. Arthur positioned himself as the benevolent temporary CEO, promising to safeguard the company until Elara was ready, a day he ensured would never come. He controlled the company, the family assets, and the entire narrative, leaving Elara exiled but not beaten. She chose anonymity, not because she was defeated, but because she was planning the kind of revenge that tasted exactly like the cold, crisp air of a winter morning and hit with the force of a sudden avalanche. The first piece of her plan had been subtle, almost childlike in its pettiness, but it was essential for baiting Arthur. Her grandfather had commissioned a custom 20-foot-tall vintage porcelain Nutcracker ornament, a priceless heirloom that symbolized the family's legacy and the Christmas spirit they cherished. Every year, it stood sentinel on the grand lawn of the main estate. This year, Arthur, now living in the mansion, decided to move it. Not just move it, but have it installed directly on his front lawn, a blatant, glittering declaration of his stolen victory. The perfect public act of dominance. Elara, living just 3 doors down, saw it hauled away under the cover of a freezing fog, the giant figure silhouetted against the weak morning light. It was a minor theft, a property dispute on the surface, but it was a profound, deeply personal insult. Arthur knew how much that Nutcracker meant to her. It was the last thing she and her grandfather had decorated together. He didn't just steal a decoration. He stole a memory and flaunted it as his own. She made a point of walking past the mansion every day, watching Arthur's arrogant grin as he waved to neighbors, basking in the reflection of the stolen, oversized Christmas icon. He thought he was winning the small battles, unaware that she was letting him win the skirmishes while she prepared to detonate the entire battlefield. Her humiliation was multi-layered. At the community college, Ellie was perpetually underestimated. Her colleagues saw her as a sweet, quiet instructor who clearly needed the meager salary. They occasionally invited her to potlucks, small, pitying gestures she accepted with practiced grace. They had no idea that the basic coding she taught was a smokescreen, that her evenings were spent running complex forensic audits and coordinating a small, highly effective team of legal and financial experts scattered across the globe. She was using their shared network, the one Arthur thought he had secured, to slowly, meticulously build a case that would not just fire him, but utterly destroy him. Arthur, meanwhile, was basking in his power. He scheduled the annual Vance Global Christmas Gala for New Year's Eve, positioning it as his personal triumph, a celebration of his successful first year at the helm. He used his position not just to line his pockets, but to constantly belittle and undermine anyone who had ever shown loyalty to Elara or her grandfather. He was a tyrant wrapped in tinsel, and the gala was meant to be his coronation. Elara made sure she got an invitation, not as herself, but as the +1 of a senior oblivious professor at the college, a man named Professor Davies, who was thrilled to attend the elite event and needed a presentable date. The weeks leading up to the New Year's Eve Gala were a blur of intense, surgical precision. Elara spent her days being Ellie, small, meek, and harmless. She endured Arthur's casual cruelty, his snide remarks whenever he saw her in the neighborhood. One afternoon, he even had the audacity to stop his luxury car next to her on the sidewalk. "Ellie," he had drawled, his voice dripping with condescension, "that rental of yours looks so charming with those cheap string lights. Doesn't quite compare to the glow of the Vance legacy, though. You know, that giant Nutcracker really ties the whole estate together. Some things just belong where they have the most impact." She simply smiled, a quiet, almost sad smile that fooled him completely. "It is beautiful, Arthur. It truly is," she replied, her voice soft. He took her compliance as confirmation of his superiority, failing to notice the cold, calculating fire burning behind her eyes. That moment, right there, watching his inflated ego, she finalized the last piece of her legal strategy. The theft of the giant Nutcracker, the childish act of seasonal spite, was not the crime. It was the evidence. It was the perfect physical manifestation of his disregard for the rules, his casual disrespect for the family's legacy, and his absolute certainty that he was above reproach. He had been so focused on stealing the throne, he hadn't realized that the minor, gaudy decoration he stole was the loose thread she would pull to unravel his entire illicit empire. The Nutcracker was the key to the entire property, and come New Year's Eve, the world would see exactly why. The tension in Willow Creek was palpable, thick with the scent of pine and impending snow, matching the internal pressure Elara felt. The clock was ticking down to New Year's Eve, the night of the Gala, and the entire operation hung on two things: maintaining her disguise as Ellie and ensuring Arthur remained blissfully unaware of the seismic legal shift happening beneath his feet. She was living a double life, enduring daily humiliations that fueled her resolve. At the community college, the small indignities were constant. During the faculty Christmas party, Professor Davies, her oblivious date-to-be, accidentally spilled cheap mulled wine down her simple, borrowed dress. Arthur's niece, Cassandra, who worked in HR at Vance Global and was also married to a college trustee, happened to be there. Cassandra treated Elara not just as a subordinate, but as a minor inconvenience, instructing her to fetch napkins with a dismissive wave of her hand, completely unaware that she was talking to the woman who was about to dismantle her uncle's world. "Honestly, Ellie," Cassandra sighed dramatically, loud enough for others to hear, "some people just don't know how to handle nice things, do they? Just be quick about it." Elara smiled, apologized profusely, and fetched the napkins. The irony tasted like ash, but she needed that facade of meekness, the reinforcement of the narrative that Arthur had so expertly crafted. Elara Vance, the true heir, was gone, replaced by Ellie, the harmless casualty. Meanwhile, Arthur was making his own preparations for the Gala, solidifying his self-proclaimed victory. He commissioned an enormous, personalized banner reading, "Arthur Hemlock, a legacy of leadership," which he had draped right above the stolen Nutcracker statue. He was hosting a steady stream of media and influential investors, giving tours of the estate, pointing out his improvements. He boasted about the Nutcracker, telling reporters it was a symbol of his dedication to tradition, a tradition he had ruthlessly stolen. Every one of his public statements was a lie, a piece of crucial, self-incriminating evidence Elara's team was meticulously cataloging. Elara's evenings were a stark contrast to her humble days. Alone in her rental, surrounded by monitors, she was no longer Ellie. She was Elara Vance, the ruthless executive, the architect of a legal precision strike known internally as Operation Winter Harvest. The legal team had filed the initial sealed documents weeks ago, not a general property suit, but a specific aggressive motion for declaratory judgment and immediate transfer of controlling assets, citing systemic fraud and abuse of temporary fiduciary duties. The initial filing was deliberately cryptic, designed to look like a minor administrative hurdle should Arthur's internal legal team ever catch wind of it. The crux of the case hinged on a specific, non-transferable clause in her grandfather's will regarding the true heir's ability to recall control immediately upon providing two key pieces of evidence: the original, authenticated founding documents of Vance Global, and physical proof of a malicious breach of trust and unauthorized use of specific, high-value personal assets. Arthur thought he had secured the documents, but Elara had held the true originals all along, replacing the company's copies with expertly forged versions years ago, an insurance policy her grandfather had arranged. The malicious breach of trust evidence was the giant Christmas Nutcracker. The statue wasn't just decorative, it was registered as a Class A corporate artifact, explicitly forbidden from being moved outside of the main estate's specific coordinates without the unanimous consent of the full, non-existent board of directors. Furthermore, her grandfather had written into the company's operating bylaws a bizarre but binding clause: the relocation of the Sentinel artifact, the Nutcracker, for personal vanity shall constitute irrefutable evidence of a director's intent to privatize and misuse corporate assets. Arthur's grand gesture of seasonal dominance was the legal grenade she needed. Her team had secured the final crucial component: a court order, also sealed until the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, naming Elara Vance as the sole immediate legal fiduciary and appointing a U.S. Marshal to accompany her to the Gala to serve the papers and execute the seizure order the moment the clock struck 12. The timing was everything. It had to happen in public, at his self-coronation, to maximize the humiliation and ensure there was no opportunity for him to legally delay or destroy evidence. On the afternoon of December 31st, Elara finally pulled out her weapon, a custom-designed, flawless midnight blue gown, not the simple dress of Ellie, but the armor of an heiress. She spent an hour with a professional stylist, transforming the meek instructor into the formidable CEO. She arrived at the Gala with Professor Davies, playing the role of the awestruck, slightly uncomfortable date. Arthur greeted them with his typical oily charm, barely looking at Ellie. He was too busy congratulating himself. The grand ballroom was magnificent, dripping in expensive holiday decor, a testament to the wealth he had temporarily seized. The massive windows offered a perfect view of the lawn, where the stolen Nutcracker stood beneath the oppressive Arthur Hemlock, a legacy of leadership banner. The stage was set. The hour was approaching. Elara took a flute of champagne, catching Arthur's eye across the crowded room. She raised the glass slightly, offering him a silent, anticipatory toast. He merely nodded curtly, already dismissing the little college instructor. He didn't realize the clock wasn't ticking down to the new year. It was ticking down to his complete and total annihilation. The ballroom air was electric, a false, festive energy vibrating with the anticipation of the new year. Arthur Hemlock, bathed in the blinding light of the stage, raised his glass precisely at 11:50 p.m. He was preparing his final, triumphant speech. Elara stood near the edge of the room, Professor Davies long forgotten, her eyes locked on Arthur. The transformation was now complete. The meekness was gone, replaced by an icy stillness that drew the eye, even in the crowded room. She was wearing a small, almost imperceptible earpiece, receiving final confirmations. 10 minutes. Arthur began his address, his voice booming with forced gravitas. He spoke of stewardship, integrity, and the enduring spirit of the Vance legacy, every word a fresh insult to the true history of the company. He pointed dramatically out the enormous windows at the stolen Nutcracker statue, illuminated by spotlights, standing guard beneath his egotistical banner. "Look at this magnificent symbol of our tradition," he proclaimed, gesturing wildly. "It stands firm, just like this company under my guidance. I have preserved what others, weaker individuals would have squandered. His eyes flickered briefly to Elara's direction, a ghost of a superior smirk playing on his lips, convinced he had completely erased her. At 11:58 p.m., the lights dimmed for the final countdown. Arthur had the microphone, ready to transition from self-praise to the celebratory cheer. 2 minutes. Elara walked forward, her custom gown rustling softly, parting the crowd with the sheer force of her focused movement. She didn't rush. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator closing a trap. She reached the bottom of the stage steps just as the countdown reached 60 seconds. Arthur, seeing her approaching, frowned, annoyance replacing his smugness. "Ellie? What in God's name are you doing? This isn't the time for a cleaning query." He tried to wave her away, but Elara was already speaking, her voice clear, resonant, and amplified by a subtle directional microphone clipped to her lapel, cutting through the music and the countdown like a shard of glass. "No, Arthur, this is precisely the time," Elara stated, her voice carrying an authority he had never heard. The crowd quieted, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The professional composure she displayed was shattering the image of Ellie in real time. Arthur tried to regain control. "Security! Get this disruptive woman out of here! She's drunk! I assure you, I am perfectly sober," Elara countered, pulling a thin, elegant tablet from her clutch. The screen displayed a digitized version of the ancient Vance Global seal. "My name is not Ellie. My name is Elara Vance." The revelation hung in the air, heavier than the velvet drapes. Gasps rippled through the elite audience. Arthur's face went white, his jaw dropping, the carefully constructed mask of the CEO finally shattering into pure panic. "That's impossible! You were exiled! You have nothing!" "You forget, Arthur. I have the original founding documents," Elara continued, her eyes fixed on his, savoring the moment of his public collapse. She didn't need to show the documents. The claim was enough to freeze the room. "But more importantly, I have your admission of malicious breach of trust. A breach you conveniently displayed for the whole town. Right there." She pointed not to the banner, but to the Nutcracker. The crowd instinctively turned toward the enormous glass windows. The clock on the wall above the stage now flashed. 00:05. "The Nutcracker," Elara announced, her voice rising to meet the frenzy of the final seconds, "is a registered Class A corporate artifact, prohibited from relocation for personal vanity. You stole it, Arthur, and put it on display to declare your personal ownership of a corporate legacy. That single act, according to the binding bylaws of Vance Global, constitutes irrefutable evidence of a director's intent to privatize and misuse corporate assets." The final seconds ticked down. 0:01:0:01:3:0:01:0:1:2. "And that evidence," Elara concluded, activating the tablet screen with a final tap, projecting the image of a legal document onto the wall right next to Arthur's banner, "triggers an immediate, non-negotiable transfer of all controlling assets back to the legal heir." 0:10:03:01. As the clock struck midnight, the sound of the New Year's cheer was instantly drowned out by the arrival of the U.S. Marshals entering from the back doors. They were fast, efficient, and unmistakable. One marshal immediately approached the stage and handed Arthur a stack of papers, the sealed court order executed precisely at the stroke of midnight. "Mr. Hemlock," the marshal's voice was official and emotionless, "you are hereby served. By order of the court, all corporate, personal, and real estate assets related to Vance Global are under immediate seizure. You are no longer the CEO. You are immediately barred from this property." The silence was absolute. Arthur looked down at the papers, then at the Nutcracker, the magnificent seasonal decoration now transformed into the instrument of his professional and personal ruin. He had stolen a decoration for vanity, and in return, Elara had sued him for the entire property. Elara stepped onto the stage, taking the microphone from the stunned former CEO. She looked out at the silent, horrified, and utterly captivated audience. "Happy New Year," she said simply, her voice now calm, yet infinitely powerful. "The Vance legacy has been restored." She then gave a sharp nod toward the window. A crew was already beginning to dismantle Arthur's pompous banner. The Nutcracker, the symbol of the theft and the vengeance, was going back home. The inversion of power was complete.